Drew, how are you?
Good, Gary. Happy New Year to you, man.
Same to you, pal. Good to catch up. And let's start with the big news last night with Dylan Moses posting on Instagram that he indeed is going to come back for another year with Alabama. I felt like this would be the case. I had predicted that, just in my opinion, it made sense for him to come back. But still, nobody knew for sure. But now he has made that announcement, and we're hoping, if you follow Alabama, that this kind of starts a domino effect with some of these guys that are eligible to come back that will decide to do so. First, talk about the decision of Dylan Moses, what that will mean for the football team in 2020, and whether or not, secondly, you think this could lead to more guys making a similar announcement.
Well, I mean, I think it could mean a ton to Alabama's team in 2020. Certainly, I think they need to make some adjustments on the coaching staff on that side of the ball. But anytime you get a talent like Dylan Moses back, who is going to have a lot to prove, because I think he made a very wise business decision. Gary, he had a very solid year in 2018 playing the will linebacker. He has not played the Mike yet, so I think what many people need to realize is he's still a neophyte when it comes to being a linebacker. He is a tremendous athlete. Before he was injured, many people believe he can clock under a 4.5 40, and I know he's done that at Alabama. So in pro day style workout. So he's a tremendous athlete. I think he made a lot of strides as a sophomore, especially mentally. But now he needs to take that next step. Hopefully, being able to watch from the sideline helps him mature in that aspect of his game as he was rehabbing. But the example I use is Dante Hightower, who suffered a severe knee injury but came back. It took him a couple of years to regain his form. But now, I mean, you see what that did for his career. He led Alabama to the 2011 National Championship, won 2 national titles in his esteemed career, and now has won 3 Super Bowl rings, and in my opinion, has a chance to be a Hall of Fame player for Bill Belichick and the Patriots. So injuries can sometimes be a blessing in disguise, and they have been so for Dylan and Alabama. And to your second point, I don't think there's any question that I think it can start a domino effect. I've been outspoken in saying this, but I think that Alabama's going to have 5, potentially 6 guys return. Certainly, I think at least 4 are going to move on to the next level, and that's normal. But I think a lot of people that thought the junior class was going to be decimated and that, 8 to 10 guys would leave and it would almost cause a rebuild. I don't think that's going to happen, because I think what Nick Saban and the staff have done, another blessing in disguise, missing the playoff, is I think that what Nick Saban and his staff have done in the last month or so. Not being able to play in the college football playoff certainly stings, but I think what they did, they hit the recruiting trail. They have a chance to sign the number 1 ranked 2020 recruiting class, but they've also, been re-recruiting a lot of these juniors. And I think the initial thought from a lot of people was that Alabama might lose 8 to 10 guys, and it might be almost a rebuild for Nick Saban instead of a reload. But I think that's probably not going to be the case. I think Alabama's going to be able to reload, and I think a lot of these guys are very proud, football players. Dylan Moses is among them, and I think 5 and potentially 6 of these guys realize they've got some unfinished business, and they can enhance themselves, and they can help Alabama football reclimb the mountain in college football, no question about it, by coming back. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think Alabama, is going to be certainly. I think Clemson will be the number 1 team in the country, no matter what happens at the national championship game, due to a lot of their returnees, especially Trevor Lawrence, and the unknown of potentially having 13 back behind center for Alabama. But if they get all these juniors back, I think they're going to be the number 2 team in the country, and I think they're going to have a chip on their shoulder, and I think that's going to be there's going to be a situation where the rest of college football may feel the wrath of Nick Saban next year.
I want to ask you about something Saban said last night, and really it goes back even before that. He's been hinting for some time now that these mock drafts are not anywhere at all in line with what these NFL personnel people are actually thinking. Well, he said last night, and I want to bear with me here a second, Drew, because this is kind of a multifaceted topic in terms of how I'm going to present it to you. But Saban says that NFL people are telling him that Alabama has 1 player with a top 15 grade, in other words, top 15 pick in the first round. He said that player is injured and is not going to play in the game. Obviously, he's talking about Tua. So he says there's one player with a top 15 grade, top 15 first-round pick grade, and it's Tua. And yet all these mocks have Judy going in the top 5 or 6, numerous other high first-round picks, as many as 8 players overall in the first round. So I've sensed already several times this year that Saban's frustrated by that. But how – and again, I understand these guys are trying to entertain and they're on TV, but how can these guys that do the mock drafts that consider themselves knowledgeable and say they taught with NFL people be so far off base in regards to what they're putting out to what NFL people are telling Saban? Or do you think maybe Saban's fudging a little bit to try to get these guys to come back? I mean, how are the mocks so far offline with what Saban says he's hearing from NFL people?
Well, I mean, you just have to look at past history, Gary. I mean, you look at Calvin Ridley. In most mock drafts, he was a guy that was a top 10 pick, and he went 26 to the Atlanta Falcons. Look at Deontay Thompson last year. He was a first or a second-round pick. He went in the 4th round. So, in many cases, these mock drafts are not correct. I mean, and I think that's the part that I think has frustrated Coach Saban, because he believes maybe that in the past they've had some players that weren't listening to him and were listening to the mock drafts. Now, certainly Josh Jacobs made the right decision. I mean, he was a guy that was – but if you remember, not many people had him in first-round mocks until late in the process. A lot of them had him in the 2nd round, but he continued to work. His workouts went really well, and he moved up. And now he's probably going to be Offensive Rookie of the Year. And with his position, you can't really blame him for going pro. And he really had a strong finish to his junior year. So I think really you just have to take them with a grain of salt. I do think Jerry Jeudy is a first-round pick, whether it's 5 or whether it's in the latter part of the first round. If Jerry ends up going somewhere between 20 and 30, I'm going to tell you something. Somebody's got to steal, and he's going to go to a playoff team, probably with a quarterback, Gary, that can actually get him the football.
Yeah,
which is going to really help his career.
Yeah, I think I think he's going to go too. I thought Saban made a good point last night. He's made it several times, as I said, that if you fall in love with these mocks, remember last year, Drew, there were some mocks that had Matt Wilson as a first rounder. And he went in the 5th.
Yeah, and he goes in the 5th round, exactly. So because of some off-the-field concerns. And he's had a solid rookie year, though.
He had. He made.
On the field. Yeah. And so he's done his job. But the thing is, what I want to say about Tua Tagovailoa, when Saban says he got a top 15 grade, that's pre-injury. And see, that's what some people didn't really understand last night. I thought Charlie Potter of BamaOnline.com did a really nice job of getting the full quote. As Coach Saban said, but see, Tua's got a top 15 grade, but he's not able to play right now and play in this bowl game, which is going to hurt him. And it's also going to hurt him because he cannot work out, and people have some uncertainty about his recovery. So I think he has a top 15 grade, but that was pre-injury, and I think some people didn't really understand that. So was it surprising to me, Gary, that Jerry Jeudy wasn't in the top 15? Probably so. But again, you have to understand, he may go if he goes to the combine, he may blow him away. So that's what I've tried to tell people. This process has just started, so guys can move up and guys can move down. Because another guy that I anticipate leaving that I think is going to continue to rocket up and be in the first round is Jedrick Wills, because I think he is very versatile, very powerful, very, very intelligent, and I think he's a guy before the season wasn't on a lot of radar as far as being a first-round draft choice, but I think by the end of the process he will be.
I sense that you really do believe that there's a chance Tua Tagovailoa comes back. Is that what I'm reading correctly from you?
Absolutely.
Give me some insight into why you believe that.
Well, I just really believe I think that he and his people around him understand that there is an above average. Now, I understand. We've seen him. I know McShay had him 4th overall. We've seen some others in the top 5. But here's the deal, Gary. When you're drafted that high, teams draft you based on expecting you to play. And I mean start as a rookie. There is no guarantee. Now, do I think that Tua will be ready to go? Yes. but there is no guarantee in that. And that is a lot of money to basically allocate to a football player. So with the uncertainty of his situation and his injury, which is so unusual, I think he'll definitely still be a first-round pick, but I don't think he would go in the top 10 necessarily. I think he would go somewhere between 11 and 20, and I think he would be losing millions of dollars if you remember in his first interview with Cecil Hurt and Kirk Herbstreit, he said, people say I can make that money back on my second contract. Actually, I can't. That money's gone. And so I think he's gambling on himself. I think that he will have an insurance policy, and I think he's gambling on himself and believes that if he's healthy, the next year, the number one pick in the NFL draft is going to be himself or Trevor Lawrence, because it's a quarterback-driven league. And if you go first or second, Gary, and I think he was on the way to doing that if he had just regained his health from this ankle injury, at the end of this season, I think, one, Alabama would have been in the college football playoff, two, because I think they would have destroyed Auburn, and two, I think he would have been a guy that's been right up there with Joe Burrow, because as we've seen, I think this will be, after we see the national championship game in 2 weeks, I think we're going to figure out who the best two teams in the country were. I think it's going to be Alabama, LSU, and then Clemson. And so I think he would have been a top 2 pick, and I think he understands that's $20+ million that he can make next year if he's healthy. And I think he's going to gamble on himself, and I think he's going to come back. And I think he didn't want to leave the way he left college football. I think college football, much like it did with Peyton Manning and somebody like that back in the 90s, I think it means something to him to play college football. I think he enjoys playing at Alabama, and I think he's going to come back and try to help Alabama reclimb the mountain.
Drew, let me ask you about the game tomorrow. I've got it to 48-31 Alabama. I think the Tide offense is going to roll with Mac Jones. And I think the defense is still going to give up some points. I've said all year I think this defense is better than the numbers, but maybe it's just not. And I think Michigan and Shea Patterson will make some plays. How do you see this game tomorrow between the Tide and the Wolverines at the Verbo Citrus Bowl?
Similarly, but not quite as high scoring, Gary. I mean, I've got 38-20 Alabama. I do think they're out to make a point. I think the defense will play somewhat better. I think guys like Chris Allen, who will start in the place of Terrell Lewis, in my opinion, and then Josh Jobe, who, if you remember last year, had some bright moments against Clemson in the bowl game. I think those guys are going to be hungry to prove themselves. I think, and I think this offense, now that Mac Jones has gotten comfortable, can be very potent. I'm expecting a big game out of Najee Harris because he came down in the recruiting process to Alabama or Michigan, and I think he's going to be motivated to continue to climb draft boards because I think this will be his last game in a Crimson Tide uniform. I think he could potentially move himself into a second-round draft choice. I think he's rising much like Josh Jacobs did a year ago. He's had an outstanding year for Alabama, and I think Alabama's offensive line, you've got guys like Jedrick Wills, who has a lot to prove and continue to climb. Alex Leatherwood, I think Alex Leatherwood's going to return to Alabama for his senior season, but he's someone that needs to continue to grow at that left tackle spot. Landon Dickerson at center, Deontay Brown. So I think Alabama, they're going to be rested, they're going to be healthier, and I think their offensive line, this is not a vintage Michigan defense either, and you mentioned that just now. So I like the matchups. Now that you've got Jerry Jeudy playing, you've got Jalen Waddle, who had an amazing last month of the season. Then you've got Ruggs and Devontae Smith. I just think Alabama's going to have and the return of Miller Forrestall. I think they're going to have too many weapons for Michigan, and I like Alabama 38-20. I think they'll force Shea Patterson into a couple of turnovers. Historically in his career, he has not played well against Alabama. He's also given them some bulletin board material earlier in the process. So I think Alabama wins the game, wins it pretty impressively, and uses it as a springboard into 2020.
All right, let's get to the phone lines. Pat is checking in and has a recruiting question for you, Drew. Good morning, Pat.
Good morning, Drew. Hey, in 1940, Winston Churchill said, "We will fight on the beaches, we will fight in the trenches." And then FDR said in 41, this will be a day that lives in infamy. Hey, you got to rank Nick Saban right up there with those as far as being a motivational speaker. Bringing back Dylan Moses to quarterback the defense, along with McMillan and the greatest linebacker class that probably college football has ever seen at linebacker, and that includes the boys back whenever Oklahoma had those great defenses. Do you not agree that this is perhaps Nick Saban's best recruiting job of bringing back Dylan Moses?
Well, Pat, and Happy New Year to you, sir. I think it's one of them. Certainly, if the rest of these pieces fall into place, without question, I think it would be it probably could be the way Nick Saban, the jump start to him finishing his career at Alabama as the greatest college coach of all time. Certainly, getting Dylan Moses to come back and have a chance to have a great year and be a first-round draft choice is significant. A lot of people had him as the best inside linebacker in the country last year. And don't forget, Joshua McMillan has the option to come back. We don't know yet if he will. He's certainly been approved for that 6th year. I know the coaching staff would like him to return. He's extremely smart, and I think he could help continue to. You talked about these young linebackers that are already there, like Shane Lee and Christian Harris, but plus these freshmen coming in. Josh McMillan could be a valuable leader to help them acclimate themselves to college football, no question about it. And I'm anxious to see. I know there's been hard on Shane Lee, but I was just telling some people before I came on this show, look, Shane Lee, there's been a lot of communication issues with Alabama defensively. And that, some of that probably it was a detriment to Shane Lee doing his job as well as he should have done it, all right? Because if you have proper communication on all three levels, that means you're playing better defensively, and it makes everybody's job easier. I really think Shane Lee had a remarkable year for a true freshman. I think Christian Harris was very solid, and now they have a chance maybe to, they won't be counted on, I think, as heavily next year, but that may be good for them. They will be able to play behind a Dylan Moses, potentially a Joshua McMillan. I do think, though, more than likely Josh was, I think his role will be more as a leader, but I still think both of those guys coming back, it would be very valuable to this defense. And if you get the other pieces, which in my opinion, the other four would be offensive guys, this football team could be very, very good with the proper adjustments on the coaching staff and be as good as any football team in the country next year.
Oh, absolutely. Hey, continue reaching for the stars, Drew, in the Rocket City, and hopefully ESPN realizes that you are their star. Have a blessed and happy New Year, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gary.
All right, thank you, Pat, for calling in. We appreciate it. Getting up against the clock. But, Drew, I want to ask you a couple other just quick thoughts with Alabama guys in the NFL. First, Derrick Henry. I said this yesterday. He was one of my favorite people to cover here. Some people take him as aloof, but he's just kind of quiet, but he's a really good person. And despite winning the Heisman Trophy and despite putting Alabama on his back in that 2015 season, he still had a lot of critics. He wasn't a first-round pick. First couple years at Tennessee, caught a lot of flack. I think some of it has, again, to do with the fact that he played at Alabama. But to see him do what he did this season and come through Sunday for 211 yards, win the rushing title, score 16 touchdowns, going to get a big fat paycheck as he's up for a contract. I mean, I'm just thrilled for him. And as I said yesterday, I don't think he's a good football player, Drew. I think he's a great football player. I still remember what he did in 2015, and I'm glad to see him finally getting the recognition that I think he deserves. How do you feel about Derrick Henry? Are you as high on him as I am?
Well, I mean, I just think he's a unique individual. I mean, you don't find athletes like him. He's, just like Cam Newton came along at quarterback and kind of redefined the position for a time because of his athletic ability. You don't see running backs like Derrick Henry. I mean, he's extremely durable. He's a guy that can carry the ball 30 and 40 times, a game. He held up physically in high school to a huge workload, was basically at some points in time a wildcat quarterback for Yulee, where he was just basically the entire offense. He bided his time at Alabama. The light came on at the end of his freshman year. He was nearly a 1,000-yard rusher as a backup to T.J. Yeldon. And then when his time came, he exploded and proved that he was basically made of iron. I think in the NFL, it honestly took the Titans a couple years to figure out how to use him, Gary. I don't know why it is in the National Football League it's that way. Sometimes I guess they want you to basically pay your dues. But I think also you have to understand Derrick Henry gets stronger the more carries you give him. And so I think he proved that. I know he did actually sit out a game the week before, but that was more precautionary. He had a slight hamstring problem, and I think they knew that the game they needed was the one against the Houston Texans. Of course, Derek was ready. He rushed for 211 yards and 3 touchdowns. I think he's as good as any running back in the NFL. He's also an underrated receiver. He didn't get a chance to do that a lot at Alabama, but I remember in his pro day, Gary, how well he caught the ball, and people were saying, well, he could even be an H-back. But what he is, he's just he breaks the mold because he's such a big guy. I'll freely admit, when I saw him in high school, I thought he would end up being a defensive end. I wasn't sure he could be a natural running back, but he is. He's an amazing athlete. He's the all-time leading high school rusher in history. He's a Heisman Trophy winner, and now he's leading the NFL in rushing. He is a very, very special athlete that I don't think gets enough credit for how good he is, but hopefully that's coming, as he's continued to come into his own in the NFL.
Yeah, we got to go. Real quickly, though, I was disappointed at the same time, not surprised that Freddie Kitchens got let go in Cleveland. Were you surprised that they let him go after one season?
Not really, because of the weight of expectations going in, Gary. They really thought they were going to be a playoff team, and then when you watch the team play, they weren't very disciplined. They were up and down the whole season. I just don't think Freddie Kitchens was ready to be a head coach yet.
I agree.
I certainly don't blame him for taking the opportunity. I think he's done a great job as an assistant in the NFL. I think he's going to continue to get jobs, and he may get another opportunity down the road. But that's a very volatile situation. An organization that still hasn't completely found themselves. I think it was a bad mix, and I think Freddie Kitchens will be better off. This will be beneficial to his career down the road. I think anytime you've been in the NFL as long as he has, you've proven yourself. He just wasn't ready for this head coaching opportunity, and let it always be understood that Bill Belichick got fired in Cleveland.
Sure did.
And he's the greatest coach in the history of the sport in the National Football League. So I just think Freddie Kitchens is going to be fine. He just probably needs another opportunity somewhere else. But again, I think it was one of those things where this team was talented, but it was not a football team yet. They need a strong, experienced head coach to take hold of that bunch and get them rowing the boat in the same direction. And I just don't think that Freddie Kitchens had enough. I guess the best way to say it is street cred with these players to get them to play as a unit, because he just had not had the head coaching experience, and I think that's what hurt him this year. Yeah,
well stated. I think some of the players worked against him in the locker room. Hey, we got to go, Drew. We're up against it. Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you, Gary.